ex-partner if this game has its way. I mean, this is a bad lesson for how relationships work. It's a terrible game. Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. and today I'm reviewing Decorum from Floodgate Games. Decorum is, well, I think the box actually says it best. A game of passive-aggressive cohabitation. Don't play this game with your spouses. Really, I mean, I do. I'm having fun with it. But let's go ahead and dive into what Decorum is. Decorum is a passive game, a passive-aggressive cohabitation. It's a game in which you have goals. You have a room set up over here, and this is all for record. This is all a fictional setup I'm going to be going with. This game does have scenarios, and in the sake of preserving the mystery for yourself, I'm just making stuff up to make it work over here. But the game has scenarios in which you're going to draw a room card from a variety of scenarios depending on the player count, and then you're going to set up the room in a certain way. So the room, the house that you're living with, this cohabitation aspect, is going to be set up based on a starting configuration. And then you each have your own goal cards. Again, this is different than a 2-player game versus a 3 or 4-player game. You're going to have 20 missions for 2-player. You're going to have 10 for 3 and 4 players. The 3 and 4-player missions can be played with both 3 and 4 players. There's a way they handle that. But each player gets their card, their specific card, with their specific goals of what they want the room to be like. Maybe you want the rooms to be, 2 of the rooms should be red. Maybe you want the living room to be blue. Maybe you want there to be a lamp in all of the rooms. Maybe you want it to be a red object in the upstairs floors. There are specific terms or things that you are looking for in the game within the confines of the arrangements that the game gives you. You see, the game gives you the option to paint every single room, as you see over here. The game gives you, every single room has the option for a wall hanging, a curio, or a lamp. But you have the option of different colors as well as different styles, and so you're going for all of these balances in the game. Maybe you like to have antique items in the downstairs rooms. Those are all very reasonable, or bizarre, but very reasonable requests that you might have, things that you want as you slowly slide into the marginal roleplay aspect of the game. And then, like any good relationship, when you don't get what you want, you don't talk about it. Apparently. This is a bad lesson for how relationships work, but potentially surprisingly accurate, as you sit there and on your turn you take a single action to decorate, to paint, to change, to swap, to adjust something going on in the house that you are both sharing together. Maybe you say, I'm going to go ahead and swap this kitchen, this lamp over here. I do want a lamp there, and you could swap an item, but I'm going to go ahead and throw this yellow antique lamp in instead. And then your partner, or ex-partner if this game has its way, gets a chance to turn around and say to you, I like it, I don't like it, or I don't mind. Or any variation of it. I love it, I hate it, doesn't bother me. And I find for myself, we slowly fall into slightly more emphatic and effusive ways of saying those things, such as, that room looks wonderful, I can't stand your style. It's okay either way. We find this way of slowly attacking each other's moves, characters, past ambitions, what you made for dinner 17 years ago. This game has a way of getting to you in this passive-aggressive game of cohabitation, as you sit there trying to achieve your objectives, your own individual objectives, in which you cannot say what you want. And here's where the problem comes in. You see, the problem comes in with the fact that I may want 2 of the downstairs, I may want the downstairs floors to be red. Okay? Actually, let's try to choose a different one. I may want one of the downstairs rooms to be red, okay? And you might want the kitchen to be blue. So for my first action, let's pretend this is the situation right now. For my first action, I may sit there and say, well, I'm going to go ahead and paint the kitchen red. The problem is you want the kitchen to be blue. So you have a very simple solution. Your objective is inherently fixed. So you just respond by making it blue. That's it. You just respond. It's your turn. You make it blue instead. You're like, I don't like it. And then you paint the room blue. Again, feels like a real relationship over here. But you go ahead and paint the room blue, at which point I have a choice of how I want to react. You see, what I know right now is I know that you just undid my move. So are you, A, acting inefficiently? For instance, what if your objective had been one of the right side of the room should be blue? Well, then you shouldn't have undid my move, you should have done the upstairs bedroom. But because you directly undid my move, I, a reasonable person, will assume that you went ahead and did what you had to do. Your objective was not variable, it was exact. Fixed. The kitchen is blue. So I'm fine with the living room being red. I'll make the living room red. That's fine. We all get along. But the real problem comes in when you both are operating with unclear objectives. What if I want one of the downstairs rooms to be red, but you want the kitchen should have the paint color of the kitchen. The paint color of the kitchen should match one of the objects in the kitchen. At least one of the objects. Well, at that point, when you made it blue, it's not because you wanted it to be blue, it's because you wanted it to match one of the blue objects there. Which means we're both operating with potentially conflicting pieces of information that if we can start figuring it around, if we can start dancing around each other, if we can continuously not communicate and still get the job done, you will find a pathway forward in which you can both achieve what you want in seemingly initially contradictory goals that turns out aren't necessarily so contradictory. You may want there to be 4 empty spaces in the house. You may want there to be an antique object in every single room. And as we move around, as we dance object to object, removing this, painting that, adjusting that, hopefully, if you are paying enough attention, not just to what you want, but to what your partner isn't saying, but rather what they're doing, you will slowly find a pathway towards a common goal. You will slowly find a pathway towards both getting your objectives, which once again teaches the lesson that you can still get what you want even if you don't properly talk to each other. I don't know what I'm doing here. It's a terrible game. In any case, that's basically what's happening in Decorum. You're trying to find the ways to your objectives as you go through it. Slowly but surely, you're moving up the round tracker over here. As you get to the second round over here, you're going to start losing lives, but also revealing your goals. You can finally and frustratingly turn to your partner and say, I want there to be all 3 yellow objects in the house. How could you not have seen that? Try not to say it that way. I don't find it's good for my relationship. What you're really supposed to say is, oh, I've been looking for 3 objects in the house. I know that it's not an obvious goal, and I'm totally understanding as to why you didn't see that, but that's my preferred preference. So yeah, that's what's happening in the game. That's the general goal of Decorum. There's going to be a few differences in terms of the way the 3 to 4 player mode come out. There's a little bit unlocking elements as you go through the game. It's not a legacy game. It's a campaign game. And for those worried about the fact that I said there's 20 scenarios and 10 scenarios, there is supposedly an app coming at the same time that will further add to the number of scenarios you have, to the number of options, so you can have, well, more than 20 or 10 in case you're worried about running out. The good news is your relationship might run out before you run out of scenarios, so you're all good here. I wonder if people take me seriously as I talk. I certainly hope not. In any case, let's go ahead and move on to the review section of this game, of Decorum, of how it plays, of all those things, starting off with the ease of play, and the rules are basically non-existent. In a good way. They basically have a rule book, which is very nice and pretty to go through, but they also have a single page setup that you can literally read off that and start playing the game. You do not need a lot going on here. You can dive in, read that single page, read the rulebook later if you want, just in case to get all caught up in clarity and all that, but a single page of rules. Teaching the game is as simple as understanding the game yourself, pulling open a pack, starting with pack 1, setting up the room, handing a card to your I was going to say opponent, technically teammate, but realistically opponent, and then starting to say, look, I'm going to do this. Does it match or align with one of your goals? You can get people up and running within 2 minutes, and you can ruin a relationship of 20 years in about 2.5 hours, maybe, something like that. As far as player count, this is a 2 to 4 player game. I've played this game at 2 and 3 players. I have not played it at 4, but I imagine 4 would be my least favorite player count, and I'll explain why. 2 players has 2 people operating in not harmony, working sort of together to get what they want. 3 players is going to have different packs because you need to reconfigure and readjust the number of objectives you're giving out to different players. And so they give you these packs instead so that you can do so. That means you have more heads in the mix, more cooks in the kitchen trying to figure out what they need, and more things you need to pay attention to from the opposing players, which does make it a bit harder. The 4-player version versus 3-player is effectively taking the 4-player cards and distributing their goals to the 3 players in the game so that you still have the setups like you need them, so you still have the challenge there. But I think it's just an issue of having more people at play. I have found 3 players to be significantly harder than 2 players, which also means it's a good challenge, but for me I find it slightly less rewarding just because I have a harder time remembering or tracking what was going on. I don't want to sit down with a pen and paper, and so the problem is I'm trying to remember, wait, no, you painted the kitchen blue, no, wait, you removed that lamp from there, and as I try to slowly piece together the various things you've done, it starts to turn more into a memory game, because in a 2-player game I find it's more binary. Either you made the change or I made the change, and if I made the change, great. If the change happened at any point in the game that wasn't done by me, then it was done by you. It makes the memory aspect a little easier to track, and therefore the objectives a little easier to follow. Again, that makes 3-player or 4-player more of a challenge, which might be a good thing, but it's a challenge linked with memory, which is where I like it a bit less. I enjoy 3 players, do not get me wrong, I plan on playing through 3 players, and I'm willing to sit down and play at 4 players, but I think 2 players is my preferred player count. As far as what I like, don't like, and can see others not liking, this game has a bunch of things going for it. To begin with, it brings out the role-play aspect in a very positive way. I am somebody that is very averse to role-playing or really getting thematically involved in my games. I like reading the story of a game, I like going through the adventure and all that stuff, but there are fewer games where I find myself invested in the character. And maybe it's because of how scarily close this can be to real life and the way we choose to not always say what we want and rather dance around it in a way that, being serious for a second, is not the best way to communicate, but often is the default way to communicate. Maybe that's one of the reasons I find this somewhat amusing. The idea of doing instead of talking to each other at great cost, expense, and something that you could simply have saved time by saying, here's what I want and that's it. Granted, this would not be a game if you did that, but for real life that would be nice. But as far as the game goes, it then kind of immerses you into that roleplay as you move things around and you scream, I can't believe you like the house like that. I can't believe you do, and you find yourself friendly, but aggressively friendly, invested in your characters or your goals, the way you want things. And the game does give you small little thematic aspects of who you are, what your relationship is. You can lean into those or not. I don't that heavily. I tend to just lean heavily into the idea of both of us being in a place trying to get what we want while not communicating. And the solutions get more and more complex as you go in a very rewarding way. That first game, the very first game you play of Decorum, depending on how it goes, I'm not saying it will be easy, but depending on how it goes, it is possible that you, like ourselves, will have a very easy first game and sit there wondering, why is this fun? I did something, you did something, I did something, you did something, ta-da, we got what we wanted. Because the first game is introducing you more to the general elements of how the game plays, and as you start leveling up, the complexity of trying to make your objectives match with their objectives, that's when things start getting complex. If I say I want a yellow lamp in the bedroom, and your objective is you want a blue Curio in the living room, we're not going to conflict with those. Where we conflict is when you say you want a yellow lamp in the bedroom, and I want let's say I want 3 antique objects in the bedroom, or 2 antique objects in the bedroom, where you start having the possibility of overlap, but the possibility of conflict in the same domain, and that's what will happen as you slowly level up the scenarios you play. And so the game has a nice sense of escalation as it ramps you up with how complicated things can get, and how much you have to start thinking outside the box, because you do have to start thinking outside the box. If I want every room in the house painted a different color, and you want every room in the house to have at least one object matching the color of the paint, we are in for a very, very messy situation as we start dancing around each other, taking moves, and eventually realizing there is a commonality here, a commonality that we can find. There are patterns in this game, but they are patterns you have to be paying attention to, not just what you want, but to what your partner isn't saying. I can't stop making jokes about relationships. I'm sorry, I just can't. It's hard. Anyways, moving on from there, those are generally why I like Decorum. It manages to beautifully capture the essence of non-communicative games. There are many games out there that have this aspect of no communicating or limited communication, and I think Decorum does so in a way that hits home in a scarily accurate way, which could make it a game that you might find to be a little bit too sensitive to you. It might, depending on, genuinely speaking, depending on how your relationships are, it might be irritating, but I find it intensely rewarding. As far as things I don't like, I have one real complaint as far as Decorum, and that really comes down to the win-lose aspect of the game. You see, there is a win-lose mechanic at play as you go through the turns, but so far I found that the degree and the speed to which you can or may not pick up what your partner is trying to go for does mean that some games you win fairly quickly, well within the allotted amount of turns you have. Other games you can get well to the end and start using up your hints and slowly flipping out your hearts, which also is a little bit anticlimactic for me. Okay, so I end the game with less hearts, so my score is worse. It doesn't really matter to me as much in a game like this, where score is not really a factor. It's a cooperative game. I've never really kept score in cooperative games, and I don't really, to me it's kind of binary. I win or I lose, and so the game has a semi-scoring element and the potential for the fact that you can win the game fairly early, or you can play the entire 30 turns and still not have a clue what some of your objectives were. Now granted, I've also had games where we won it on the very last turn after we had revealed 2 of our hints or goals or what our objectives were, so it does have that aspect. But I think that my biggest issue with Decorum is it doesn't purely fall into a win-lose aspect to a game, which means to me it is more about the experience, which is fine. I very much enjoy the experience, but I do like winning and losing. I do almost wish this was a little bit more binary in the way it approached that, as opposed to a slow timer that gives you hints as you go and then eventually you get it or not. So that's my main pet peeve as far as how the game plays. As far as how the game plays. As far as things that you might not like, to begin with, it can be frustrating. Genuinely, all my jokes aside, all my aspects about relationships and communication and all those things, those are very real problems in this game. If you are playing this game, you may find yourself frustrated with other people. You may find yourself frustrated with the fact that you just did something and they just undid it. And the worst part is, maybe they're right. Maybe the kitchen was supposed to be blue. Their kitchen, their mechanic, their aspect was fixed, and when they corrected your action, they were doing it correctly. In which case, the problem's you, by the way. In the general, the relationship, the problem is you. But what if that's not what it said? What if they simply undid your move, thinking that they have to do something a certain way, but really you're the one that's right? Now it's just frustrating and irritating as they aren't picking up on the strategy of the game, as they're not communicating and ruining things for you. This is not a game for people who do instead of thinking. If you simply act, if you simply do what your card says to do, if you do not think about how it interacts and meshes with the other players and the actions they are taking, this will be frustrating for you, it will be frustrating for the people you play with, and it won't be a rewarding experience because there's no fun in simply grabbing a blue lamp and placing it into the living room. The fun is understanding why you can't place the blue lamp into the living room and what they have on their card that makes that so that you can get around their objectives. Because maybe you didn't care about the blue lamp, you simply wanted an antique, in which case when they remove the blue lamp, that's fine. Modern, you want modern. So I'm going to go ahead and hang a modern wall hanging instead. And now we see, do we dance, we move, we go back and forth. You have to think instead of doing, or this will be frustrating. And then lastly, the other complaint I can think of is the fact that replayability might be a factor for you. Now, I said there's an app coming, and there seems to be an app coming, so we'll see what happens there. But if you don't want to play with the app, I don't really have a lot of reasons here. If you don't want the app for some reason, if you're not interested in using that, then replayability and the limited number of scenarios may be a factor. For myself, I think you can easily go through all 20 and start again and completely forget everything, but with the caveat that because there's a nice sense of escalation to it, it's kind of like you'd start with all 20 and then like ditch the first 5 and continue from there, and I'm happy there's an app coming is what I'm saying. As far as final thoughts on Decorum, Decorum is a game that I initially tried first at PAX Unplugged. As at PAX Unplugged, they had it set up, I tried a scenario, and I was like, that was intriguing, but I played a single scenario, I danced into it, and I was intrigued. But I also didn't think I'd like it as much as I actually have wound up liking it. This is a game that has grown on me play after play. Each additional play has more nuance, more interesting aspects to it as you try to figure out the complexities of what they want, the complexities of what you want, and how those things mesh together. This is a puzzle, and a puzzle that leans heavily into role-playing. Most, not all, most of my plays have been with my wife, which, again, depending on your relationship, might be something that makes the game better or worse for you playing it with your significant other. For me, playing this with my significant other has wound up with me wanting to show her the game because I had already tried it and enjoyed it. She played it. She despised it. And then she learned to love it very quickly. She went from, this game is so frustrating, why would anyone do this, to yelling at each other and screaming at each other and trying to get our ways together as we work together while not actually communicating. This is a 4 to 5 for me. I'm really enjoying what it brings to the table. It falls more into the party game genre for me, but a 2-player party game, which is something that is a little bit less common in my collection. And additionally, I find it interesting because normally I'd say, hey, if you don't like hidden information games, this game's not for you, but my wife despises hidden information games. She does not like that aspect of hidden communication, hidden aspects, and she's really leaning into this game for now. Our marriage is strong, I hope. In any case, as far as, yeah, I mean, that's basically it. That's basically it. I really like Decorum. I think it's a solid game. I recommend it. I think it's an enjoyable experience with the context that if it sounds intensely frustrating to you, it might be. It's hard to really know until you sit down and try. As far as other game recommendations, first of all, The Mind. The Mind is one of my go-to games and favorite games when it comes to hidden communication, when it comes to trying to share information while not actually saying a thing. I love The Mind. I always recommend The Mind. It's all about reading your opponents while saying nothing at all and hoping that your 67 is played after their 66. And then alternatively, Hanabi. I think this one is a little bit more similar to Hanabi in the way that you're working together while trying to achieve a fireworks display while not actually knowing enough about what you want and relying on the other players to help you along the way. A little different spin on the hidden aspect and the hidden communication and what you can and can't say, but one that, to me, to a certain extent, evokes the same feeling of gameplay. While speaking personally, I drastically prefer Decorum. Hanabi is a game that feels similar, and yet I didn't love quite as much. Until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. I hope you found this video helpful, and as always, have a good one.